Water rides at theme parks, especially in the UK, can seem like some of the most timid and tame options for you to ride when you go to a theme park like Thorpe Park or Drayton Manor. And in some cases, they can seem kind of pointless with our British weather. Today, I'm going to be putting forward a case to maybe change how we use water rides here in the UK. 2 separate occasions there have been tragic deaths in the UK on water rides alone. And on top of that, operationally, I think they're quite flawed. If you're interested in hearing me out, then keep watching this video. Just quickly before I get started, if you're interested in buying theme park pins like these, head to the description where I've got a link to the shop. Usually my videos are pretty light-hearted and, well, I attempt to make them comedic. That's up to you whether you think they are or not. This video is going to be a little bit more serious, and because this is real life people who've experienced real life loss, and I imagine are still grieving the people who are lost. So please remember that when you're making comments. I often see comments about this case where people are like, oh, they shouldn't have done that, they shouldn't have done this. You think, well, it's very easy for you to say now, and I'm sure you've all done something that maybe you shouldn't have been doing, okay? Doesn't mean that anybody deserves to die. I'm going to immediately jump in talking about an incident that happened at Drayton Manor nearly 10 years ago. Guys, just a quick point I wanted to make. Obviously, while researching for this video, I have been looking at other videos on like similar topics, and I found myself feeling really disgusted by how dramatised the whole videos were, and just the exaggeration in the language and like almost making it out to be like a movie. I don't think that's my vibe, guys. That doesn't sit right with my conscience. So I've tried to make a real effort in just like laying out the facts for this video instead of trying to appeal to your short attention span. So hopefully you still learn something new in this video, but I'm not going to be doing all that. So it was the 9th of May 2017 at Drayton Manor, and it was a school trip day for a school where these students had an like outstanding behaviour records and everything, so they were rewarded with a school trip to Drayton Manor, which is very cool. In my school, we got put into like a big prize pot for iTunes vouchers, which is showing my age, I think, a little bit. Do you guys even know what iTunes vouchers are? And this event that I'm about to be talking about really did shock a lot of people, including theme park enthusiasts, but of course the people closest to the person I'm talking about. And it's also sent ripples throughout the whole of the theme park industry in changing their rules to prevent this from happening again, but which we'll get into a little bit later. In 1993, Intamin, a theme park ride manufacturer, built a river rapids ride at Drayton Manor. It took guests through like a western themed area. And the thing about river rapids rides is that they're kind of unpredictable. You sort of bounce here and there depending on your weight and the distribution and number of riders. I think it had like capacity for 6 riders, this river rapids. And it was just marketed as a family attraction, as most of them are. But I don't know if you've noticed when you've been on, river rapid rides, you think, it's not a lot to keep me in here. Like, all we've got is a little bar in the middle. And in Alton Towers' case, please remain seated, by an Australian voice in Congo, which, did you guys know that's Francis Jackson? This is a little tangential, but I found that interesting. So on the 9th of May, pupils from the Jamaica Academy, I believe is how you pronounce it, all were on a school trip together at Drayton Manor. And among them was 11-year-old girl, Evha Jannath. And what happened next would be the subject of years of investigation, massive impact across ride safety in the UK, and court proceedings and all sorts. At approximately 2:20 p.m, Evha got on board one of these rafts at Drayton Manor with a few pupils. Oh, this is just so heavy, guys. I'm already struggling to get through this video because I remember this. It was just horrific. If you're here for like a light-hearted time, I probably wouldn't want to watch this video. I've got lots of other light-hearted videos with like fart sound effects and stuff. You'll love it, but not this one. Something interesting about this is that the ride itself, nothing had malfunctioned, no mechanical errors had occurred, no ride operator mishaps had occurred, which makes this accident all the more tragic. The students were just flowing along the river rapids as they normally would, and as you can imagine, as water splashes up on you and obviously comes from behind you because you're all sat in the middle and you have nothing to keep you sat down, your instinct is to stand up especially if you've got a bar in front of you to help pull you forward. And it was suspected that that's what these pupils were doing, as they were getting splashed by the water, that they were standing up on the ride. By the way, these aren't the first people to do this. Before this incident, you'd see people do that on pretty much every cycle of any rapids you've seen. Although there were ride safety instructions telling them not to do this, as I say, it was still very common. So they carried on the ride, and as it ended up hitting a sort of ride barrier, the dinghy made contact with the barrier, and the impact caused everybody to be jolted, and Evha was thrown, or as some people have actually described, as being propelled out of the raft, and unfortunately she landed into the water. Here's something I just realised I completely forgot to include in the video. Evha wasn't the first person to have fallen into the waters of Splash Canyon. 4 years previously, a lady called Nikki, her son, who was only 10 years old, nearly came to a similar end when he was thrown into the water in the same way. Thankfully, he was able to swim out with help from the public. He was panicking and couldn't get over the rocks because they were all slippery, and a lady jumped over a barrier to try and help him. And Vicky said that it was quite fortunate where he fell, because if it had been somewhere else it may not have been the same outcome. And she actually did communicate this to Drayton Manor, asking for something to be done so that this couldn't happen again. But unfortunately, as you know, 4 years later, Evha is in the water. And you may be imagining that the rapids are quite shallow waters, because you only need enough to have a bit of a flow. The rapids here are actually very, very deep, and of course very high currents, because that's the point of the ride. After she entered the water, Evha was initially able to move through part of the channel. It was found later in court via evidence that she had come to the conveyor belt section of the ride before falling into deeper water and sadly drowning. Emergency services were obviously called, and she was taken to hospital, but sadly did die later in hospital due to drowning. So Drayton Manor closed the park immediately while the health and safety investigators did their work. It actually took a couple of years for investigators to piece together exactly what happened on this day and what led to this really tragic accident, as they already had things like risk assessments in place, supervision from ride hosts, all these things. So how could this have happened? One of the most significant findings was that Splash Canyon didn't have any sort of physical containment features on the rafts, and there were no gates to stop them from being able to fall off the raft, which it is just so crazy to think about, isn't it? It's just harrowing. It's just harrowing. I just can't imagine what it was like. But if you're thinking that's a ridiculous ride design, well, the ride had operated like this for several years with no incidents at all, as had several duplicates of this kind of ride around the world. And specifically in the UK, you can see Congo River Rapids at Alton Towers, and Viking Splash, I think it was, at Legoland, had similar ride style. And the investigation also revealed issues in the emergency procedures and the communication systems, and chillingly, the speed at which the park were able to tend to a guest that had fallen into the water, as it was suggested that there was a very long time before Evha was recovered. The inquest, by November 2019, so over 2 years had lapsed since this tragedy, it was declared an accidental death. And the way that they summarised it was Evha had been standing during part of the ride when she shouldn't have been. She was propelled out of the raft after it made contact with a barrier. She entered deep water and drowned. She'd been on a ride without a teacher accompanying her, which is an interesting factor to consider. Recovery efforts took a long time after she'd entered the water. One sort of glimmer of hope out of this whole situation is that there was a prevention of future deaths report that was aimed at obviously preventing future deaths in the same way that this happened. Guys, I'm gonna look down the barrel of my camera lens right now, and if you were one of the people who were like, ooh, why is the River Rapids at Alton Towers closed? I want to ride it. Oh, one accident, who cares? It's okay for me. Please just take a look at yourself, please. Are you happy to sacrifice your ride on the River Rapids for the sake of stopping other really, really young people drowning? I'm sure most of you weren't thinking that, and that's why you watch my videos, because you're good eggs. That genuinely was a response that we saw from enthusiasts here and there. And do you know what? Even once the River Rapids Alton Towers opened back up and the waterfalls were off, you guys were still complaining about the waterfalls being off. Why do you think they had the waterfalls off? Let's use some brain power, guys. I know most of you know. I know you know. It's just a bit shocking, isn't it, that people can be so heartless with their comments. So in March 2021, so yes, a lot of time had elapsed, Drayton Manor pleaded guilty to breaching health and safety regulation, which is interesting, isn't it? Because they hadn't done anything outside of the norm for this to have happened. As I say, there was no staff that had, been neglectful or anything like that. This could have happened anywhere. Like, seriously, this could have happened anywhere. They called it systemic system failures associated with Drayton Manor's operations and risk management. And Drayton Manor as a company was fined £1 million. Mr. Justice Spencer described it as an utterly tragic waste of life. So I'm not making fun of this. It just is, isn't it? Oh my gosh. And another layer to this entirely. I said that some time had passed between this incident and the sentencing. And by the time that they had this sentencing, the original company had gone into administration. So the fine was effectively symbolic because there was no expectation that it would ever be paid by a company that had gone into an administration. And what do you think? Do you think that company went into administration because of this incident and, the reputation that Drayton Manor could have got from this? Or was it something completely different? If you want me to do some research and do a deep dive, I can do that in another video if you want. Although I would like the next video to be a little bit more lighthearted because I love roller coasters and theme parks, and this isn't sucking the life out of me. It just breaks my heart. I was 11 going on school trips to Alton Towers, riding the rapids, and I just think, what? I'm not making it about me, guys. I just seriously think that could have happened to any of us. So how has the UK theme park industry changed as a result of Evha's death? As I've mentioned before, it expanded far beyond just Drayton Manor alone. For years, the rapids have existed in kind of a weird category where they're halfway between thrill and halfway between family. Yeah, very unpredictable. You can have a really fast day on the rapids. You can have a pretty timid and boring day on the rapids.
I actually know a guy who just had a sad ride on the rapids. So it can be anything.
But they've never really been considered high-risk rides. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, this isn't the only water attraction in a UK theme park that has caused death. It only took a few days after the accident for other theme parks to start reviewing their own water attractions, specifically the rapids rides. Some were temporarily closed while others just had inspections take place. But the main thing that they recognised was that even if everything mechanically was working flawlessly, there was still clearly a risk. And if a guest somehow managed to enter the water, it could be life-threatening. As I mentioned before, historically, most rapids ride vessels had low backs for the seats and pretty much no door to get in. There were just no gates or anything like that. You just step in on your spinning bombery, what do you call it? You just step in when you're on the Lazy Susan and get in. So things that were added if they weren't there already were higher seat backs, easier grab handles in the middle, more controlled seating layouts, so potentially meaning not as easy to swap seats halfway through a ride to get to a drier spot or something like that. Entry and exit gates were added, and improved passenger containment systems. What do you guys think that means? Just having a look at what you see on the rides now, what do you think that means? And another thing that isn't mentioned on this list, but I think is quite noticeable for us, was things like features in the ride that would make you want to stand up and get out of your seat, such as the waterfalls. Water guns weren't even working for a long time on some of these attractions. The soundtrack with "Please remain seated, please remain seated, please remain seated." If you've heard that, Alton Towers. I'm only really referencing Alton Towers because that's the one I'm most familiar with, but it's very common all around the place. Rumba Rapids, which is it closed now, right? Rumba Rapids is closed. Could that be related to this accident, I don't know. But if you remember, there was nothing really going on Rumble Rapids anymore. It was sort of just a slow dawdle around in a circle with several members of staff on posts going, sit down, sit down. You might have found that annoying and that it sucked the fun out of it. But now you can see why they took that so seriously and why the staff really want you to sit down. Okay, guys, it's really important. So I'm quite an impulsive person anyway, but for an impulsive person, I have a lot of videos about safety at theme parks. So if you're interested in why you can't put your kids in giant shoes to get them on rides, I have another video on that somewhere. As I mentioned a couple of times, it took so long for Evha's recovery out of the water to happen that there's been things put in place now to make sure that if someone were to fall into the water, that they could come out a lot quicker. Look at the sweat on this mic stand. That's sweat from my palms. I genuinely do find this really disturbing. I'll just hold it like this, shall I? What a minger. What a minger. Across the industry, the operators have reviewed things like the emergency stop procedures, staff communication systems so they actually know what's going on, water rescue training, which is so important. I've seen around the place there's little flotation devices that you can chuck into the water. This next bit is going to be hard to hear, but this is sort of like a detailed breakdown of from the moment Evha entered the water to how long the recovery took. So after she entered the water, she waded towards like the edge of the channel. A member of the public reportedly like shouted asking her to stop, and she still continued to go towards the unloading area. Then she attempted to climb the travelator, which is the bit that lifts the rafts up back to the station, but it was covered in algae, and sadly she slipped into a much, much deeper pool of water, which was about 12 feet deep. And apparently 11 minutes after staff were alerted that there was a child in the water, that's when they spotted her face down in the deep pool of water. And she wasn't physically recovered until about 6 minutes later. Oh my goodness, can you just imagine the wait? Like that must have felt like hours. So roughly in total, she was in the water for about 18 minutes before being pulled out, which is just so hard to get your mind around. And after they recovered her, they did CPR on her, and the ambulance crew tried to provide extra life support, and she was air ambulanced out to Birmingham's Children's Hospital, but of course later died. So the complaint was that the emergency stop button wasn't pressed quick enough after she got into the water. It was suspected initially that she experienced some kind of some head trauma because she did enter the water head first, but in the post-mortem it seems that she mainly had like a chest injury, and a pathologist said that it was drowning that ultimately caused her death. Again, one word, preventable. So that's the story of Evha Jannath's death at Drayton Manor, which is so tragic. And I'd like to think now, if somehow somebody ended up in the water, there are better things in place to prevent somebody from drowning. It's just so harrowing, isn't it? It's really, really sad. And my heart goes out to the family of Evha and also the people who had to witness this, like her school friends. It's just so tragic. But I'm gonna summarize by talking about UK water rides a little bit, because I'm a theme park enthusiast, not a morbid death YouTuber, if you know what I mean. I don't know what the name is, because I don't have any authority and knowledge other than the research I've done on the internet on things like this. But I do know a fair bit about the theme park industry compared to the average Joe. I don't think we need water rides in the UK at all. There's only about 2 weeks of heat wave where people actually want to go on them. They take up a lot of room. They're very expensive to run. The UK weather is absolute rubbish. And this isn't the only time somebody has died on a water ride in the UK. Like, don't get me wrong, I love like Congo River Rapids. I love going on for a ride like that, but you can't mess with the elements, guys. I think like having water as an aspect in your ride is still fun. Like the water coaster that we've got coming to Paulton's Park, I think is very exciting. Like that's very controlled, whereas the rapids are so random and jumpy. Maybe that's a bit of an emotive reaction, but after reading a case like that, it's hard to not just be like, get rid of them all so that it can't happen again. It's just so sad. What do you guys think about water rides in the UK? Do you like them? I really don't like my shoes being wet. Again, reading stuff like this makes me grateful that that's all that's ever happened to me is wet shoes in a wet bag, because it could have been far worse. So on that lovely note, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoy more cheerful theme park YouTube videos, this channel is probably the right place for you. But I hope you found today's one interesting and thought-provoking, and hopefully it gives you a little bit more grace as to why you're here. Please remain seated constantly on Congo River Rapids. Okay, have a nice day. Bye.